overcoming the resistance that keeps us sick and suffering. My name is Andrea, and this is Adult Child.
What you holding on to? Just let it all go. What's making you slow now? Just let it all go. What you got to do?
Welcome back to Adult Child, where we take a deep dive into the impact of growing up in a dysfunctional family. Real quick, if there are any new listeners out there, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm Andrea. I'm the captain of this ship. I am a recovering alcoholic. I am a recovering codependent, and I am a recovering adult child. What the hell is an adult child, you ask? An adult child is someone who grew up in a dysfunctional family with unresolved childhood pain that surfaces and plays out in adulthood, and not in a very good way. I highly recommend that you go back to episode 1, as each episode builds off each other. You'll also get to hear all about the shit show that I once was, and still am at times, let's be honest, but I promise that you will be entertained. So each episode we dive into a different topic. I provide you with a bunch of information, I share my own relevant experience, and then I have a conversation with an interesting guest. And today, y'all are in for a real damn treat, as I will be talking to Joe Ryan. Now, Joe is the host of the podcast, It's Not You, It's Your Drama. And I am super excited for y'all to hear this conversation, especially to all my dudes out there. You know, you don't hear many straight men out there talking about their trauma, talking about their dysfunctional upbringings, being as vulnerable as Joe is on a weekly basis on his podcast. It is truly inspiring, and I know that he has had a huge impact on so many people, but especially a lot of men, to go to that place of vulnerability and to face that shit that is holding us back from being our truest and best selves. So today, we are diving deep into resistance. Now, adult children are the grand masters of resistance. We have been practicing this shit our entire lives. We took on these common characteristics, the laundry list traits, as a form of resistance to our true selves, because we learned that it wasn't okay to be our true selves, that we had to be someone else in order to feel loved, in order to feel safe, and then we carry these traits with us into adulthood as a form of resistance against our unresolved childhood pain. And while these characteristics may have provided a semblance of feeling loved, feeling safe as children, they make life a real fucking struggle in adulthood. So then when we consider the notion of healing, of confronting our past, we encounter even more resistance. I mean, can we even catch a break? So in my episode about alcoholism, I made the comment about alcoholism being the disease that tells us we don't have a disease. And so does the disease of family dysfunction, but in an even more insidious way. The disease of family dysfunction is a sneaky motherfucker, and it will do whatever it can to keep the dysfunction alive and thriving, to keep us in our faulty programming and destructive thought and behavior patterns. So, what the hell do we do about this? As we've talked about, awareness is always the first step to change. Resistance is similar to denial, and we may not even realize that resistance is in play. So I want to talk about 6 of the most common tactics that the disease of family dysfunction deploys to keep us from healing. So number 1, disloyalty. We tell ourselves that healing is an act of betrayal to our family, but we've talked about this, that this is complete bullshit. You know, healing requires that we talk about and acknowledge what we went through, but this is not about throwing our parents under the bus. This is about throwing the dysfunction under the bus. Number 2, We blame our parents for how we turned out. Therefore, it's not our problem to fix. They're the ones that fucked us up, so why should we have to be the ones to do the hard work to heal from it? But let's just say you grew up in a home where your parents smoked in the house, and then in adulthood, you get lung cancer. Now, it's not your fault that you had to inhale all that secondhand smoke as a kid. It's not your fault that you got lung cancer. So why should you have to be the one to go through chemotherapy and radiation? Well, we all know that this sounds rather delusional. So does the line of thought that we shouldn't have to be the ones to do the work to heal from our childhoods. Let me be blunt, as I know you would expect nothing less from me. You're the only one that can do anything about it. Your parents can't do the work for you. It'd be great if they could, but they can't, okay? Number 3, minimization. We tell ourselves that what we went through wasn't that bad. Like me, right? For example, my parents never hit me. My parents never told me I was a piece of shit. How much could it really have impacted me? Well, in fact, quite a lot. Emotional abuse, emotional neglect, emotional abandonment. Research has shown that this can be just as damaging as some of the more heinous types of trauma and abuse. So, if your head is telling you right now, how bad could it really be? I would like for you to just consider that perhaps this is the disease of family dysfunction trying to prevent you from healing. Number 4, we think we are broken beyond repair, that there is no hope for us. We're past the point of return. This is also complete bullshit. Anyone can change, every damn one of us, but it does require work. Number 5, we think that we can heal on our own, that we do not need to seek outside help. This was my experience. I thought that I could just fix this shit on my own, that I could just read a book and that I just wouldn't date for a year and that I would be a-okay. And not only did I not get any better, I got worse and I found myself in even more pain. Listen, we're nuts, we be gray, we be needing to get some damn help. Now, that can look many different ways. A therapist, a 12-step group, a support group, a spiritual advisor. Bottom line, we cannot heal in isolation. We need others to help us see the shit that we can't see, to give us hope, to hold our hands as we go through this rather grueling yet rewarding process. And last but not least, number 6, pain. We know that healing will require us to look at all the shit that we have been trying to avoid our entire lives. And we don't think that we're strong enough to cope with the painful emotions that will arise. But what we fail to realize is that resisting these painful emotions just makes them worse and eternal. Whereas when we confront our pain head on, we will eventually move past it. Okay, so you've identified, you've acknowledged your resistance that you may be facing. So then what? Well, then you do nothing. You accept it. You sit with it. You don't fight it. Just as we must sit with our painful emotions in order to move past them, we must sit with our resistance in order to move past our resistance. Because what happens is when you sit and accept your resistance, you will eventually get to a point where the pain of the resistance becomes greater than the pain of confronting the shit that you're resisting. This is what we talked about last week, right? About how our greatest pain ultimately becomes our greatest blessing. I wish it didn't have to be this way, but unfortunately, that's the name of the game. Adult children have a ridiculous tolerance for pain, and it is only through great pain that comes great change. So we're going to be talking about this and more in my conversation with Joe. And for any of you who may not stick around to the end of the episode, if you could please give me a 5-star rating on Apple, I would really appreciate it. It really helps other people find the show. And there are a lot of sick and struggling adult children out there that need to hear this shit. So thanks in advance. And here's Joe.
keeps on raining, levee's gonna break. If it keeps on raining, levee's going to break. When the levee breaks, have no place to stay.
It's my pleasure to introduce a fellow adult child, a fellow trauma survivor. He is a trauma coach, and he is the host of the podcast, It's Not You, It's Your Trauma. Hello, Joe Ryan.
Hey, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, I think that your podcast could also be, or I might be using this as an excuse the next time I need to break up with a boyfriend. I'm going to say, it's not you, it's my trauma.
There you go. It works. Fill in the blanks with whatever situation.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not me, it's you. It's a Seinfeld episode.
Yeah. It's not you, it's my broken picker. So you've been doing the podcast now for what, a couple years?
Probably a year and a half or so.
And it started with you were doing some writing, and then one day you decided to record yourself, and then somebody was like, you need to be sharing this shit. Am I right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been writing and journaling for decades, and it always was a relief for me. Like, just brought so much clarity. It connected the dots. I started to understand, my life, and it got to a point where the writing just didn't seem to do it anymore. And one day I just, it was actually Christmas Day. I was miserable. I was alone and just, feeling sorry for myself, and went into my office and turned on a microphone and started recording in place of writing. And I found that I had gotten to a deeper level within myself. And I just felt completely connected to me in a way that I had never felt before. And I just kept doing it. I just kept recording, and I kept feeling lighter and better, and there was more clarity. And then one day I let somebody listen to one of the episodes. Like, it wasn't even an episode, it was just me rambling. And they were like, why isn't this a podcast? And I was like, well, because nobody can know this like publicly. and then, just sat with it. And I found that I just found a lot of peace in recording. And I ended up putting it up, not thinking anybody was ever going to listen or would ever be popular. And I just kept doing it. And it just kind of gained momentum real quick. So I was really surprised by that, because it wasn't one of those things where I planned on, I was never sitting there going, I'm going to host the podcast and I'm going to go down this path. It was just kind of, it was just a necessity for me to get in touch with myself. And then I figured I'd just start sharing it, and people seem to connect to it. So that's really good mirroring and validation.
Yeah, and shows that you're on the right path, and kind of the universe giving you a little wink that this is the road that you're supposed to go down.
It definitely feels right. I've tried a lot of different things to heal the pain, different careers, different hobbies, and none of them, I felt like I was trying too hard to become something and get somewhere to take the pain away. And with this, I go into the pain and I express it verbally, and it resonates real good inside. I mean, it's hard to put some of the stuff out there that I put out there, because it's so exposing, and I'm so raw and vulnerable with it. But that's where you want to get to. You want to get to that place where your soul just feels in complete harmony with yourself.
Mm-hmm. Have you had any sort of revelations around kind of switching to a verbal format, and why the writing kind of stopped working and being, cathartic, and then switching over to speaking? Have you had any insight as to why that started to do it for you instead?
I think it was just the stream of consciousness with speaking, where I don't have to worry about, my arthritis when I'm writing with a pen or autocorrect on the phone. It just flowed a lot better. And I found that I got below all of the fear and the anxiety, and I got right into the pain and the trauma, and just speaking about it, like I met it on its own level. And I found that so much more healing. I don't know how to explain it any better than that. It just clicked. It flows. Like I'll fire up the mic and I don't stop and edit. It's just this one long stream of consciousness, and that feels so good not to be watching yourself from behind and judging yourself, and just getting into yourself and just being.
Yeah, because it's almost like the pen adds almost like another barrier between what's going on in your head and then what comes out.
Yeah, it's another layer there that's between you and your soul. And when you speak from your soul, it's kind of just raw and genuine and pure. And I just love how it feels. I wish I could live there 24/7 because it just feels so right.
And have you been able to, because I've listened to your podcast quite a bit, and just your struggle with being able to receive praise or compliments. Now, when you receive feedback from a listener and they tell you how your podcast is impacting their lives in a positive way, do you feel like you are able to receive that?
So much better now. I have a good friend of mine. She was telling me that, this isn't all of you. This is just something that you do. And at one point, I just felt like I was putting myself so far out there, and I immersed myself so much in it. I had no balance in life that, it was kind of everything. And then the feedback made me uncomfortable because I didn't see any value in it. And it was like, yeah, you might enjoy this, but I feel like a piece of shit in the rest of my life. So do you really know what you're talking about? Like just that negative self-talk. And then it just had gotten easier over time as the more I've owned it and just feel like it's one part of my life. It doesn't define me completely. And when you fill yourself up and you start to value yourself more on different levels, you don't rely on the feedback to fill you up as much. I didn't believe it because I didn't feel good about me. And the better I feel about myself, the easier it is to take the compliments and the feedback that you get. But yeah, it was really, really painfully uncomfortable. It's like, you're not talking about me, are you? Like, because I don't have this perception of myself, but I don't know if I ever will. So the feedback doesn't lift me up. It doesn't drag me down. It just kind of, it feels, it's a really good positive mirror, and it keeps me motivated.
Yeah, at first you're like, I think you sent this to the wrong person.
Yeah. I'm like, you can't be talking about me, can you? Like, you sure you got the right guy?
Well, that just, it's nice when we're able to reflect and see our growth, and how we change. So I think that's awesome that you're able to reflect upon that and see how you're able to receive it differently.
And the best part about it, I think not the best, but the biggest change in that was I stopped internalizing it and looking at it from my point of view of, you must be emailing the wrong guy. It was more of, look how much courage it took for you to write this and expose yourself to a virtual stranger. And, taking that slant on it also made it easier. And it was more of a connection to seeing how brave people are to tell you some really horrific things that happen to them. And you look at it in that context, I feel more of a vehicle than anything else now.
I was thinking about, with you being a straight white male, and you don't really hear a lot of them out there spreading the word about trauma and talking about these very kind of vulnerable issues. And so I'm wondering, has there ever been a block there where, I don't know, your testosterone or your masculinity has like ever come into play, or is that at all in your negative self-talk?
Yes, and yes. It was really hard at the beginning. I've always been a deep feeler. I've always been sensitive. I put on the macho Neanderthal thing, when I needed to. And that just took a lot of energy. And, talking about love and self-care and being emotional and being vulnerable as a guy, at first it was really hard putting that out there and feeling manly and feeling strong and feeling tough. Because just all the stigmas against, being a male and being emotional, I just couldn't pretend anymore. And there was a point where it was like, either I'm really going to get to know the real me, or I'm going to live the rest of my life unhappy, pretending to be something I'm not. So I try to look at it more as a human thing as opposed to a gender thing, because I get emails and messages from men and women, and underneath it all, it's the same thing. We want to be true to ourselves. We want to be authentic. We want to be able to love and be loved and give love and feel love, as us without fear. And it doesn't matter what gender you are. We all have the same need for that connection. So I try to take that out of the equation. And it's building up strength doing it. I would record something, I would put it up there, and then I would go hide for a couple of days and, not look at email or phone, because I was afraid of what I was going to get back. You're not a man, you're a wuss, pull your pants up, let's get going. And there wasn't much of that. There was a little pushback, but it got to the point where it didn't matter. Yeah. I just need to be me, and I'm human more than I'm a man or any gender. And I try to put it in that perspective.
But I think I think you're an amazing role model for that, though, because what you're doing is very manly and masculine. So I think you're a wonderful example for a lot of men out there who are kind of stunted and blocked in that area. So
thank you. I appreciate it. It's conditioning. You're supposed to be this, and that doesn't feel right. The transition from going into that vulnerability to find the strength to be okay, to be emotional and vulnerable and open, it's a process. Just like any part of recovery, you have to learn how to get comfortable with the things that make you feel shameful and uncomfortable and worthless and not living up and not fitting in. I don't care to fit in anymore. It's more, I just want to belong to self, and whatever comes after that comes after that. And, the messages I get from men are you can feel the hesitation with them getting vulnerable as they're sending the email, like I'm reading it, but you know that they want to get there. And it just takes time because that's protection. All of that macho bullshit is just protection for the softness underneath. And when you can pull away that protection and get into the vulnerability, that's when you're going to build strength with it. I feel okay saying I'm a sensitive, deep feeling man, where I never used to be.
You should put that on your dating profile. Deep, sensitive, emotionally available man.
Yeah, so you'd be surprised how many women they say they like, but they really don't, because when you show up and you're vulnerable, they're just like, no, where's the Neanderthal part? It's like, but you said you wanted this. But I think most women don't know what to do with it.
No, yeah, it's okay. Most men don't know what to do with me either, just because I'm kind of a whole lot. So that's okay.
Yeah, and you'll find the right fit if you just stay true.
True that. So I want to talk about you hitting your trauma bottom, like kind of your adult child bottom. And I know that you've had kind of two. So, I think we're similar in the sense that we grew up in dysfunctional families and then turned to drugs and alcohol, and then got sober when that stopped working. And then at a certain point in sobriety, all this shit kind of came to the surface. So I was just hoping that you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I've started drinking and drugging at an early age. Hospitalized at 17 for overdoing it a little bit, and
a little bit,
just a little bit. Waking up in the hospital was never fun. That was the worst hangover of my life. But and I continued after that. It was just a way to eliminate the pain of being that was in, all the trauma. And I didn't know what the word trauma was really until about 5 years ago. But when I first started drinking and drugging, it just shut down that part of my brain that just beat me up every single day, and the self-consciousness and, always watching and being on guard. It took it away, and I just felt like I was at home and there was a peace to it. But eventually all addictions fail, and, you wake up one day and you're like, I don't want to live this life anymore. And, I cleaned up for a long time and, got on track, had a business, a wife, kids, house, living the life that I felt like I was raised to live. Like I didn't really have a plan B, and it all fell apart on me, and, lost pretty much everything I'd built up my entire life in like a short 18-month period. And I just kind of bottomed out, and, I picked up again after 17 years. And
Mm.
it wasn't like, it was just a weird place to be, losing everything and realizing that I didn't have the strength and the energy to spend the next 20 years getting back to that place. And I didn't know how to go about living anymore. And then one night I picked up and I went real hard for a while. And it's amazing how fast you get back to where you were. Like, it's this drinking muscle memory, where I thought it was going to be the slow progression of just having a couple of drinks here and there. But I was blacking out drinking within a month. And I woke up one day in somebody's backyard, didn't know where I was. And that was the reality check that I needed. And I just kind of started to wean off of it again. And I tried to get myself back, but I was just sitting in the pain and the trauma. And I realized that nothing outside of myself was going to take it away anymore. And I just didn't know what to do with that. And for about 2 years, I was just like a walking zombie. And then I had this, abuse trauma recall that I didn't know that it was there previously. And that really took me to the place I needed to go. Like, that was the ultimate bottom for me. I was raw. I was exposed. My entire reality that I had spent my life building, was not there anymore. Like, I had this whole false self thing going on, and I felt like I perfected it. And then all of a sudden I had this memory of abuse, and I had to find out how to live with that. And it was just so painful. Like, I had tried everything in recovery. I've read everything. I've listened to everything. I've written. When I went in and sat in the pain of the abuse for, a couple of hours and then days and weeks after, I just kept feeling lighter by sitting in the fear and the pain and the hurt and reliving the abuse, over and over again. Every time I had gone to it, I just felt emotionally lighter. There was less fear. There was less anxiety. There was less pain. And that was the big click for me. It was like, okay, this is the way we recover. We sit in our pain and we realize the reality of our life, not the lies that, or the false self that you've kind of built up to cover up the shame and the hurt. It was actually to go in it and sit with it and re-experience it, to realize, to grieve it. It was a loss of childhood. It was a loss of innocence. To grieve that loss so that it didn't drive me anymore. It didn't drive my compulsions. It didn't drive my self-hate. It didn't drive the addictions. It was a way of freeing myself from it. And then you just keep doing it. Things start rising up and you feel them and you learn how to process the hurt and the pain that's still trapped inside of you.
Mm-hmm. So when you drank after 17 years, obviously you have 17 years of 12-step recovery in your head. When you picked up that drink, what was that experience like? Was there any relief? Because I just feel like if I were to relapse, I feel like I would just feel immense guilt immediately. I don't even know if I would be able to enjoy it.
Well, I guess it's where I was at. I lost a multi-million-dollar business. I lost my house, my wife, my kids half the time, my life savings. I met a woman after I gotten separated. We were about to move in and start our life together. She got hit by a car, didn't know who I was, got her back to health. And then she was like, then I started dealing with the trauma of the car accident. And I kind of spiraled down, and she was like, I have too much work to do. I can't, you're detracting from me recovering. So basically the entire life I built up for years was gone, and I was just lost. And I went back to that familiar language, which was drinking. And, and I thought about it, I was thinking about it. It wasn't like I just picked up one day. It was like, can I do this? Should I do this? I was so proud of the 17 years, and I'd become so empowered by not picking up for so long. I had nowhere to turn. I just felt completely alone in this world, and I couldn't stand the pain that I was living in, that the life that I spent decades creating was gone in 18 months. And I was just this lost little puppy out in this big, dangerous world. And that was the only way that I knew how to cope when things got that bad. And I went back to it. And I thought I was going to feel worse. Like you say, the guilt and all that, I really, truly thought I was going to feel worse. I think the thing that felt bad was that you know, I did feel ashamed, calling my sponsor and going, listen, I just threw away 17 years. And, I felt like I disappointed myself and I disappointed other people, but I didn't know how to live with what I was dealing with alone and sober.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. And I was off and running, but it didn't last long, that heaviness. Like, I'm glad that I went hard quick and then had that slap in the face of, where's my car? Whose backyard am I sleeping in? And how did I get here? It's like, we don't want to live this way anymore. We know this life. We've done it. It's played out. It's not going to lead anywhere. And that was the climb back up from there.
I know there's a stupid expression that like your disease is, whenever we're in a meeting, our disease is out in the parking lot doing push-ups.
Yeah. It was always stronger than me for a very long time. Absolutely. I was on the couch drinking and the disease was working out in the backyard.
Oh, so my experience was that I always knew that aspects of my childhood were less than ideal. But I thought that since I was never physically abused or sexually abused, how could it truly have impacted me that much? So when I kind of hit this bottom, it was more so a realization of how much my childhood really did fuck me up. And so when you kind of had this that trauma recall, I mean, had you completely dissociated to where you didn't remember any of the abuse, or you were similar to me, were like, things were less than ideal, but it wasn't that bad?
Well, I knew a lot of the abuse, but it's just this one, I had no idea that it was there. But I knew the abuse. I knew a lot of the abuse, and I was working through it. And for me, the physical abuse is the easiest for me to work through. It was that slow drip of emotional conditioning, of being molded into what my source figures needed me to be, so that they didn't feel their own shame and their own neediness and their own hurt. That it was just slow over time, that you were conditioned into being something that you weren't, to please them, to get a little bit of affection. That's the most complicated part of it, because it was so subtle over such a long period of time. And, so much of your personalities develop, I think it's like 80% of your personalities develop before you're like 4 years old. Now, I'm not exact on the numbers, but so, you're conditioned before there's any logical thought. And it's ingrained in you. So to go and understand the conditioning before you even could ever have memories of it, for me, that's the hardest part, is to figure out and to work through. And that's all feeling. Like, you can't think your way out of this. You have to feel your way through it. And your body knows. Your body knows more than your mind will ever know. So sitting with those feelings and feeling them and following them down to where they lead, like, that's where the answers are. Nobody wants to do this work. This work sucks. It's hard. It's painful. It's humiliating. It's degrading. It's just everything negative. But when you go through and you find the answers to how I have fucked up my life so many times and self-sabotage and gone down the wrong paths just not to feel pain, when you go into that pain and you sit with it and you make friends with it and you become stronger than it, your life gets so much easier. It's just the point of committing to doing it.
Yep. I wanted to talk some about just kind of resistance to healing and, resistance to going down this path. And my experience was that, when I really hit this bottom, I had been in so much pain that I was ready. I'm like, let's go there. I'm the type of person that I get so excited to go to therapy. So I don't feel like I experienced the kind of resistance that I think most people do when it comes to this stuff. I was just like, let's do it. I finally figured out what the fucking problem is. Let's go there. But I know that for a lot of people, that's not, really the case. And they have a lot of fear about what emotions, the work will bring up, and the pain and not being able to handle it. And I know that you do a lot of trauma coaching. And so I was just wondering if you could speak upon, your own experience and the experience of others when it comes to resistance to beginning the healing journey.
Well, I think most people don't know or acknowledged and have minimized their abuse. So,
Mhm.
you grow up in a home, like, and it's normal to you. And you create this false self unknowingly and become whatever that your role is in that family. For me, it was nice guy, people pleaser. I'm not allowed to have anger. I'm not allowed to, be upset. I'm not allowed to to have sadness. I am only allowed to have these positive feelings. I really truly thought that was me. So when you start to realize that it's this, you've been programmed and conditioned to be this way, and there are emotions that you have cut off and have never integrated, the fear of experiencing and feeling my anger and feeling my sadness brought me into shame. And that critical parent in my head would just beat myself up. So I didn't know that I had a false self. When I realized I had, the resistance was the pain of going against your family system role to become more authentic, because the guilt of, speaking your mind, setting boundaries, like, those were beatings. Those were verbal and physical abuse when you stood up for yourself, that you learned not to stand up for yourself, become who everybody needed you to be. And when you start becoming yourself, you have to deal with all of that negativity. And nobody wants to do it. So I think a lot of the resistance for people is they have minimized their abuse. They have internalized it that they're just wrong, broken, and defective. And they've accepted it on some level. The journey to turn that around is so difficult. And it's so painful that you do resist it. I mean, what human goes into pain? We are always looking for ways to not feel bad, to feel better, to feel more whole and complete. But we do it in ways with, drinking, drugging, working, sexing, whatever, obsessing. We find ways to stay away from these feelings. I say this all the time, I have to embarrass myself to heal. I don't want to look at all the things that I have done that I have shame about, because the pain and the emotional disturbance in me is so great that I feel like my head is going to explode. I can't handle it. So the resistance is, humans don't want to feel bad. We spend our life trying not to feel bad or to feel good. And we look at everything on TV, magazines, social media. Nobody is showing anything negative, anything that isn't shiny and glossy. And I'm looking at all this stuff going, well, I feel like a worthless piece of shit. The rest of the world's got it together, and it's compounded. So I'm going to gravitate towards making you look at me in a way that I feel better about myself, instead of actually going into the pain and the sadness.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about how you've been able to get to a place now. You talk about sitting with your feelings and your thoughts. When do you feel like the transition occurred for you to where, because I know now that the pain, the uncomfortability is temporary, and that on the other side of it, you will feel lighter. And so now you're at a place where you're kind of able to accept those uncomfortable feelings and emotions. Was there like a pivotal point where you feel like you made that switch?
It was when I had the trauma recall about 4 or 5 years ago. It was, I started to, I couldn't escape where I was at. Like, I had to either push back on somebody in anger, or I had to accept the fact that this had happened to me. It was just like, the thing was, this isn't normal. And I said, and then there was this long pause, and somewhere deep down within me, it came up. It was like, well, what happened to me wasn't normal. And soon as I had said that, those words came out of my mouth, this floodgate had opened. And for 4 hours, I just lived in this abuse that had happened decades ago. After the 4 hours, when I finally had calmed down and relaxed, I had felt a peace within my body that I had never felt before. I was just raw and open, and I wasn't hiding, and I wasn't running, and I wasn't protecting, and I wasn't covering up. Like, I just took all of my shit and I dumped it right out on the table for everybody to see, including myself. I was light. I mean, listen, it sucked afterwards. Like, I had a lot to deal with. I had a lot to process. I had to figure out, how I'm going forward with this new information. I didn't like that at all. And that was a shitty couple of months. but there was that a piece. And that was the big click for me. So when feelings had come up after that, and even to this day, I will get a long stretch of very comfortable, very peaceful inside of me. And then all of a sudden, one day I start to feel uncomfortable. And I know now it's like, okay, the next layer is starting to present itself. I don't know what this is. I don't know where it's going to lead, but I know in a few days, I'm going to have to schedule time to just sit alone, quiet, and feel bad. And I wait till it starts to build, it builds, it builds. I can feel it building, and emotionally I'm heavy. It's hard for me to get through the day. It's hard for me to focus and concentrate because my body just is overwhelmed. It's like there's a blender going on inside with my emotions. They're just all over the place. I feel bad. There's no clarity. And then I will sit with them. And sometimes it's an hour and sometimes it's 48 hours. And I will eventually get to the point where it will lead me to this release. I'll find anger, I'll find hurt, I'll find sadness, and then I will finally get to tears and sobbing. And that's the grieving point. And once I start sobbing about it, I feel so much lighter the next couple of days or couple of weeks. And every time this happens, it gets easier and easier to sit with the feelings because I've taught my brain and my body and my cells that I am stronger than the trauma reaction that's going on in my body, and I can handle it. So just as much as I schedule time to go out, be social, have a good time, entertain myself in those ways, I schedule time when I need to feel bad. Because if I don't, I'm not integrating that back into my body. I'm just avoiding it.
Do you feel like you've gotten to a place where you can really embrace your story and your pain? Have you gotten to a place where you view it as, you know, as a gift, or you're able to view your past experiences with gratitude?
Well, it depends on the day, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you do the 30,000 foot overview, I am grateful for the trauma recalls. I'm grateful for having gone through 12-step programs. I'm grateful for all of the pain that I've because sitting in the pain is self-love and self-care. It sounds crazy, but avoiding it is abusing yourself more because you're in self-hate and you're in shame. And that is just more abuse that you're putting on yourself. When you go in and you release all of this out of your body and you experience it, you're really, truly taking care of yourself because that's the healing. There are days that I hate the fact that I had to live this life. They are a lot fewer and far between, and they do not last as long. I do have to go into self-pity every once in a while. It's just a part of who I am. To kind of balance it out. I can't walk around like Superman all the time going, yeah, I got all this together and I've embraced it and I've owned it and I've integrated it. At some point, you know, you're tired, you're cranky, you're emotional. You're going to fall back into that first language of self-hate and self-pity every once in a while. The key is that I don't beat myself up for it. I'm like, okay, sadness, shame, and self-pity has shown up today. You have a choice. You can ride this out and just let it be. Or you can start beating yourself up and it's going to last 10 times longer than if you just allow it. So I feel like I've embraced it as much as I can. And each week and each month and each year that I keep doing this, I embrace it more. And the self-hate and the self-pity just starts to evaporate.
I talk a lot about how blame blocks us from healing. And I know that it's something that you talk a lot about as well. So I was hoping that you could speak to that.
Yeah, because blame is, you know, I waited for apologies for decades. You know, I blamed my entire life was the excuse for me functioning and taking responsibility for my own actions and my own well-being. When you blame, you just keep yourself in the victim role. It's an excuse. And listen, I needed to blame to survive. That was my only coping mechanism for a while. But it keeps me a victim. I keep putting it on somebody else. It's your fault. You did this to me. I need you to say the words and to love me the way I need to be loved so that I will be healed. See, I've given up all my responsibility to my abusers. When I stopped blaming and actually took responsibility for my own healing, that's empowering. Like I ran out of like my biggest excuse. So then when I stop blaming, that puts me more into the self-hate and more into the shame, and it gets me closer to the trauma. Blame, for me, and listen, it's so easy, and I would love to do it sometimes. Sometimes, if I'm biking and somebody cuts me off, I'm going to blame him for breaking my flow. I mean, you're still going to blame somebody somewhere. But the empowerment that you get when you start to nobody's going to do this work for you. And if these people in your life that did abuse you, that made you feel worthless, if they're not going to show up and do this for you, you are the only one. So you have a choice. For me, it was when I first started to stop blaming, it was very confusing because that was a way of getting in touch with my anger, to put it on somebody else instead of dealing with it on my own. And it just keeps you in this endless loop. Nothing ever changed for me the more I blamed. As soon as I stopped blaming, almost everything changed. Because you have to do the work. You're the one that has to emotionally go through this, even though it wasn't your fault. It's your life. And your life has to become your responsibility at some point. And you can choose to sit on a couch or laying in bed and just wither away in blame to nothing and not do anything for yourself. Or you can go for treatments and try to have a positive attitude and keep healthy and work to beat this, to just beat it, not let it beat you. That's what it comes down to. You have to beat your abuse. You have to beat your trauma. You have to empower yourself to become stronger than it. And if you don't, nobody's going to do it for you. What kind of life do you want? Do you want blame and sit in sadness, or do you want to be empowered and feel good?
Yeah. And it's not just having the trauma and abuse go into remission. It's not just beating that, but we also get to live a life of depth and meaning and get to know who our true selves are and live with purpose. So, the rewards of it are much greater than just dealing with the abuse and trauma.
There's no end to it when you blame. It's just a loop that you're not going to get out of. At least when you start taking responsibility, it will get a lot worse, the pain, the emotional pain, before it gets better. But when it gets better, how much lighter and how empowered, and the possibilities in your life just vastly open up. And you now have choices, because when trauma is driving you, you don't have any choices. You are just reacting out of fear and panic. When that starts to subside, your head gets clearer. You can make choices and set boundaries based on what feels right for you. It's all about getting to know yourself without the trauma there.
I've heard you talk about that. I can't remember what I was listening to, but just about the whole process of being in adulthood and finally starting to figure out like what I like, what I don't like, what are my interests. I mean, what has that process been like for you, and what have you learned about yourself?
That's going to be a lifelong evolution.
Yes.
Because the more we start growing, things change. What I like today, I might not like in another year. I didn't know who I was. I knew who I was supposed to be, to feel loved, to feel good, to not feel shame, to not feel guilt. I became that person unconsciously. When you strip that away and you look around, it's like, what food do I like? What kind of music do I like? What TV shows? What clothes? What things do I like to do? So I just started doing things, anything. And I was like, you don't like this. This isn't you. People are going to judge you. You're judging yourself, and you haven't even got off the couch to do it yet. And I would fight through all that negative talk, and I would just go do different things. And I would try so many, and most of them didn't stick. But the ones that did stick, I have a lot of joy and pleasure I get out of it. It clears my head. It makes me feel good about my day. I would have never did that if I wasn't, because I would have talked myself out of it. I mean, I still sit here and I'm like, oh God, I really want to go down and get a chicken doner on McDougal Street, but it's like, 60 blocks from here. And it's like, is it really worth taking, a bike ride down 60 blocks to get a sandwich that you like? And it's like, yeah, it is. What
Hell
else
yeah.
am I doing? This is what my gut is telling me. But I go in my head and it's just like, well, you're really safe here on the couch. You're going to bike all the way downtown. It's going to take, 2 hours round trip. And then like the next thing you know, I'm on the couch and I haven't eaten. 4 hours have gone by, where if I just would have listened to what I felt like. So it's starting to listen to that voice more. And the fear gets quieter and your soul starts to get louder. And it's practice. It's talking yourself out of not doing the things that you want to do, and reversing it so that you start to show up for yourself. And it's building blocks, right? So at the beginning, maybe I did one thing a week for me that I really wanted to do, and I wouldn't allow myself to be talked out of it. And then that starts to add up. It was like, well, that feels good. I feel empowered. That wasn't as scary as I thought. What else can we do this week? And then sooner or later, you just start building on that. But it's so hard to those tapes in your head, the negative talk, the way just try to listen to your internal dialogue, how it just stops you from living out of fear. Because I'm so conditioned that I'm only allowed to do these 7 things on this planet. Because growing up, if I did anything outside of those 7, I got shit for it. And I didn't like the shit that I got because I didn't like how it felt, because I internalized it to worthlessness. And as an adult, I'm still parenting myself like I was parented in my childhood home, even though I don't live there anymore. So it's learning how to reparent and get those negative tapes out of you.
Well, and when you think about it, with the amount of calories that you're going to burn going 60 blocks, you could eat 2 sandwiches.
Yeah, double the fun, double the pleasure.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and that's it. I think there's always this point. I felt like there was always this invisible force field around me where it was like, it was only safe to go to these certain places, but anything outside of that, I just didn't feel safe because I don't feel safe within my body. It's going to those places and pushing your limit a little bit more each time. And before you know it, the things that I do now, if I look back, I'm amazed that I'm actually doing these things. To normal humans that don't live with trauma 24/7, they'd be like, what's the big deal? And that was part of the negative talk too. It's like, you're a grown man, but you're a chicken shit.